Following is a conversation with Dr. Namrata Goswami, who is an independent senior analyst, an author, and a Minerva grantee. We talk about a lot of things here. We talk about northeastern states, about Naga's plight, Mizoram. We talk about Indochina, US and China, COVID in China. We also talk about outer space. So we start from northeastern states, go all the way to China, US, and we touch outer space. We have broken down the conversation into three parts. This one is where we talk about the northeastern states, about Naga's plight. Okay, so today we have Dr. Namrata Goswami with us. She's an independent senior analyst, author, and a Minerva grantee. So, Namrata, Dr. Goswami, just for the audience, can you describe more about you, your life, the things you do? I've Googled a lot about you, but just for the audience.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor. So I started my educational career in Assam, in Cotton College, where I did my bachelor's. Mm-hmm. Before that, I grew up in a very small town in Northeast India called Haflong, which is a mountainous town. So I did my schooling there. And after I finished my bachelor's, I did my master's in public administration from Pune University. And then after that, after that, I did my PhD in Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi in international relations. And postdoc for a year in Australia. And then after that, I worked for nearly a decade in the Indian Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA, where I looked at great power politics, ethnic conflicts in Northeast India, and also the rise of Asia. In 2015, I relocated to the United States. And once I came here, I established my own strategy and policy consultancy. And within that, I competed for a Minerva Research Initiative grant to study China-India space policy and US space policy, and the grant was given. Based on that, I did some field work in China and India. And since then, I have worked doing consultancy work, education activities, as well as writing for the public forum here in the US and across the world. So that's my background. My specialization is international relations, India, China space policy, as well as US space policy and COVID as in terms of foreign policy. So thank you for having me, and feel free to ask me anything within those particular themes.
Yeah, sure. By the way, even I did my graduation from Pune University. So.
Oh, I see. How wonderful. So what did you graduate in?
Computer engineering.
Oh, fantastic. So really happy then. same alma mater.
Also,
I'm still studying in Pune University as well. We both are from Pune.
Oh, how wonderful. I loved Pune. I was there the years 1994 to 1995. And then I continued my education, and I think I finished master's in the late 1990s. But it was a wonderful city. It was very student friendly. And how is it now?
Still is. The weather is very nice, yeah.
Yes, I know. The monsoons, the rain, the rain is beautiful.
It's just a little crowded right now. It's a little crowded right now because the IT industry has migrated from Bangalore to Pune.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so there are a lot of companies and people working, so it gets crowded sometimes.
Yeah, and when I know, and when I was there, there was a lot of construction work going on, and especially in the Deccan area, the main area near Ferguson College. Has that all been completed?
Yeah, it's completely jam-packed.
Oh, I see.
Now metro coming in Pune. That is the only.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned JNU. People here criticize JNU, but see where you are.
JNU is actually a great university, especially depending on your specialization. So I did my international relations specialization from the School of International Studies, CPOT, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament. And I must say that after coming to the US, I have conversations from people all across the world, including different universities. And what I learned in JNU is world class. I mean, I don't feel like I am at a disadvantage. So yeah, I know, I wonder why people criticize, because it's actually a really good university and very in terms of just representation, it's very all India represented. So you get to meet people from all over, and it opens your mind.
True. I think that is the problem. It opens your mind.
Yes, you become very, you become aware of a lot of things.
Also, I've written many books. Can you tell us something about those books?
Sure. So my first book that I worked on was on India's Northeast. As I come from Northeast, I started looking at some of the conflicts there, especially the armed conflicts. And so the first book was an edited book with another colleague of mine from IDSA. And so Dr. Pushpita Das. And so we looked at that, in that book, we looked at how the different conflicts came about, what are the reasons for it, including identity politics, and then the resolution that the government was doing. My second book was on, again, an edited book, which looked at my other specialization, which is international politics. So we looked at the rise of Asia. And in that book, the chapters included studying how different countries in Asia, including China, Japan, looked at how international relations was coming about in the 21st century. The first standalone book that I did as a single author was on India's national security and counterinsurgency, which was published by Routledge, London. And that book basically continued my foray into India's national security policy in the Northeast, as well as some of the counterinsurgency measures that the government adopted. But within that book, I also argued that the Indian government basically looked at counterinsurgency from two frames. One is the Copilian perspective, where you look at a very strong state response, but you also look at how you can actually bring armed groups into a peace process. But then I also said that India also has the Gandhian tradition. So basically where you try to resolve conflicts through peaceful means, and which is also very much represented in how the government has dealt with the Naga conflict. From then on, after coming to the US, I've been able to publish two books. One is, of course, my 10-year work on the Naga conflict, which was published last year by Oxford University Press, looking at the Naga insurgency, its origins, start, the motivations, the fears of the local people with living among an armed movement. And the latest book actually is what I am very passionate about now, which is space. So this book, yes, outer space. So this book looks at, it's called Scramble for the Skies, the Great Power Competition to Control the Resources of Outer Space. So if I have to explain that book to your audience, so there is this very interesting analysis coming out of NASA, including the China National Space Administration, that there are resources in space. For example, there are resources on the lunar surface like iron ore, water ice, silicon, platinum. And as you know now, platinum is very expensive on Earth, yet we use platinum in our phones and everything that we basically use in terms of technology. So the idea is that if you are able to access so much of platinum on asteroids and on the moon, you can actually not only bring down the cost, but you can start using platinum in other, services. So the book deals with that. And the book also looks into the space programs of the US, China, India, Luxembourg, and UAE. So I really enjoyed working on the book, the last book. It took me about 3 years with my co-author, and finally it's out. So yeah, that's a little brief, insight into the books.
We'll try and link all of your books in the description, actually. A lot to cover with still.
Thank you, that'll be great.
And now that we have stumbled upon space, yes, Dheeraj.
Okay. So I want to start with how did the Northeast insurgencies start, and what are their motivations? Because I have no idea. I just know that there are Naxalite groups that inhabit Assam and West Bengal, but that's all I know. So if you can tell us more about why and how those insurgencies came to power.
Sure, Dheeraj. So the Northeast insurgent group started much before India became independent, especially the Naga conflict. So in 1918, the Nagas basically argued that they are very different from the rest of India. And this was when British India, India was under the British. Okay. So Yeah, so the Nagas, they had participated in the First World War in Europe, and some of them, after they got exposed to the European battlefield, came back and argued that the Nagas are different from the rest of India in terms of how their culture is, what kind of education and religion they follow, and there is not much similarity. And historically, the Naga areas were not administered by any Indian kingdom, including the Mughals or the Ahoms from Assam. And so they pointed out to the Simon Commission in the 1920s that because of these reasons, the Nagas should be offered their own state. But when British left India in 1947, they included the Naga areas as part of British India in the Indian state that was formed. So since then, the Nagas under the Naga National Council started advocating for an independent Nagaland. So their argument was that, as I mentioned historically, that they are not similar. And one of the leaders who led the movement was called Angami Fizzo. So Fizzo has a very interesting past. He took part in the fight for Indian independence led by Subhash Chandra Bose, the Indian National Army. But his fight was not for India. His fight was for a separate Nagaland. So Fizzo actually had training in guerrilla warfare in some of the areas in then Burma. And so he used that to train the Nagas later. Not many people know that the most famous battle in the Second World War, which resulted in the Axis powers being defeated, was actually fought in Kohima in Nagaland.
Oh.
It's a very interesting history between the British forces, Allied forces, and the Japanese. They were in part of the Axis forces. So in that battle, the Japanese forces were defeated, and that resulted very much significantly in turning the tide in support of the Allies. In fact, the British Museum 2 years ago designated the Battle of Kohima as the most important battle in the Second World War, even more than the D-Day celebrations that they do. So the Battle of Normandy. So it's a fascinating history. But anyway, continuing with your question. So once they started advocating for a separate, homeland, they started arming themselves. About 1956, they started an underground movement under the Naga National Council, which started to attack Indian forces. And so then it resulted in the movement getting violent. It has been continuing for the last 100 years, right? Since 1918, 100 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a long conflict of identity, fears. The Nagas are a minority, so their argument is that once we become completely integrated, rest of India will, dominate us. So those are the arguments. Now, historically, there has been efforts to resolve the conflict. First of all, by the use of force, which did not succeed to the extent of stemming out the conflict. But then there are also different levels of peace engagements with the Naga conflict. So it started around 1997, and then it continues till date. And the important point is that the peace negotiations are at the level of the Prime Minister. So just that will tell you how important this conflict is in terms of resolving it.
Right.
The Naga, and so there was, in 2015, they signed a framework agreement where they agreed to give up arms, but then there were certain conditions laid that we will need a separate flag, a separate constitution. But I think the Indian government's position is that once you are a part of Indian territory, you cannot have sovereignty, first of all. And second, you cannot have your own constitution. You have to work within the Indian constitution. I don't think those issues have been resolved yet. But then the Naga conflict inspired other conflicts in the Northeast. For example, the United Liberation Front of Assam, which is an armed group in Assam that started in the 1970s, also had similar arguments that Assam has never been a part of India. The Assamese identity is different. And so Assam needs to be an independent Swadhin Assam. Ahom is what they pronounce, so independent Assam. And so that violent conflict has also continued. Today, one part of the Alpha has signed a peace agreement, but they have broken up. And then there is the Alpha Independent that is continuing its violent movement from bases in Myanmar. And so the Northeast actually has several different armed conflicts that are ongoing. Manipur has one of the largest insurgent groups in India, about 72 of them. The most popular is People's Liberation Army of Manipur and the United National Liberation Front of Manipur, again started in the 1960s and 70s. The difference between the Manipuri armed group and the Naga armed group is that the Manipuri armed groups like the UNLF and the PLA have not agreed for peace negotiations with the government of India. And so that's the difference. I would say that this conflicts would continue till the point that the issues of identity fears, economic deprivation, political representation, continues. And Northeast, as you know, historically has been one of the least developed areas in India. And so the concerns come out of that. There's a lot of poverty. Lots of young men and women join the armed groups because it gives them a salary.
True.
Yeah, and I've done field work in some of the conflict-affected areas. And when I interviewed some of the cadres of the armed groups, they told me, and some of them are very young, Dheeraj. They are between the age of 14 and 18. So you can imagine that their decision-making process is based on peer competition and the context they find themselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just to support themselves and like buy food and stuff.
Yes, and also they're very young, so they don't see any other opportunity. They only see
True.
In some, how India is. In some of the areas, people don't have access to health or good education, or they don't see their life improving. And so they see and so when the armed groups come to their villages, that's the only, organized group that they have seen in their entire lives. So then they start joining that group, and they see those group as part of them because some of the leaders are from the local areas. So they don't see them as an insurgent. They see them as, oh, my brother is coming. You see what I'm saying?
True. Yeah. There's a sense of familiarity between them and the insurgents. So
yes. And I've written about this. In fact, in my book that I published a few years ago, and in my presentations across India, I have mentioned this point that it's important to realize that many of the armed group leaders are from the local areas. So they grow up in that area, they form, social bonds, they love soccer, football, they play football together with the villagers. So we have to understand those social bonds if we want to resolve the conflict.
So what is the future like? Are they in any time going to get the independence they want, or how do you see it?
Mayank, I don't think they will get the independence they want because, as I mentioned, India is very firm in terms of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Mm-hmm. So, and secondly, they don't have the arms and the capability to fight the Indian army for any kind of resolution that way, right?
Okay.
So independence is out of the question. What is possible, however, is that they can get better autonomy and representation in their own local areas. So an example is the Mizo National Front, which was an armed group in Mizoram that fought for Mizo separation and sovereignty for 20 years, from 1966 to 1986. But in 1986, the conflict got resolved because Laldenga, the leader of the Mizo National Front, signed an agreement with then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. And in that accord, they agreed to have a separate state of Mizoram. And the armed group decided that they will now start fighting elections and become democratic. And in fact, Laldenga, who was the chief of the armed group, became the chief minister of Mizoram. So the conflict got resolved because they got more autonomy, they got more economic benefits. And Mizoram is one of, I think, the most educated state in India after Kerala, or maybe the second. But it's really done well for itself. So you can see that conflicts can get resolved. A similar example can be said about some of the groups that basically trace their origin to my area, which is the North Kachar Hills, now called the Dima Hasao district. So they have also agreed to resolve the conflict. But everything has to happen within the Indian constitution. That is India's position. And India, I think if you look at the Naga conflict itself, India's constitution established 371A, which is a special provision of the constitution that enables these groups to have special rights. Their land cannot be bought by someone from outside. They have a state assembly that is reserved for about 60 member state assembly where 59 seats are reserved only for Nagas and general category is only one. So there are ways that you can resolve the conflict, and it's working in some of the areas. But I think the biggest question is, will there be equal economic benefits, and whether people feel that their voices are heard at the national level? And I think that's the main reason why they continue to represent themselves using armed groups.
Right, which is why I'm wondering why we only know about Israel and Kashmir. We have never heard of these issues anywhere.
True. I am hearing all of this for the first time. I just know that there are Naxalite groups living in Andhra Pradesh as well, but I had no idea this went so this has been going on for so long.
Yes, and that is very, because I agree with you that the Naxalite group, of course, are all over India, right? And Andhra Pradesh is one of the main areas where they are located, and also the Chhattisgarh area and Madhya Pradesh area. And because of that, because they do these spectacular acts of violence against the Indian security personnel, the mainstream newspapers carry a lot of analysis. But when it comes to the Northeast, the education of who the Northeast tribes are, the different languages, culture, where their culture comes from, all these are not much known. And also the fact that they had been having this secessionist groups for so long, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think we need more education and more awareness that there are different groups around India, besides the Kashmir issue or the Israel-Palestine issue, that have identity issues as well. I tried to write a lot when I was in India on the Naga conflict as well as the other Northeast conflicts, but the usual tendency was to not really discuss it at a level or a priority level. I think the reason is because these areas are seen as peripheral. They're very much at the border. They do not have as much representation in parliament as, say, Uttar Pradesh has. Nagas have just one representative in parliament. So the politics does not allow you to have that kind of conversation. And I think finally, the reason is because people don't understand some of the cultural differences as well. And so some of my friends in the Northeast who live in, say, Delhi, complain that people think they are from Southeast Asia because they look different.
100%.
Yes, and so they feel very affronted and insulted by that. And so there is a lack of understanding or pure ignorance that these are Indian citizens and have been for hundreds of years.
I'd like to add that the North India is very, not everyone, one group doesn't speak for the masses, but there is this trend of insensitivity towards other groups that come to Delhi or Chandigarh from other parts of the country. I think I've seen that myself.
And this thing even surfaced on the internet when the COVID started, because at that time there was a hatred for Chinese, and then people were actually, abusing and discriminating even the Northeast people, saying that they are from China and they have brought all of these viruses here, and it's because of them this is happening. So
I know that's very tragic. I saw some of my friends from Northeast post on Facebook that they formed a help group because people started behaving badly towards people who don't look like, say, from a person from North India, right? And
true.
It's very tragic. It happened in the US too, by the way. They had this Asian hate. Yeah, so it's very tragic around the world that people are so ignorant and are willing to attack people just because they look different. And I think Northeast, there was this great fear among some of the Northeast people living in other areas that they were being targeted or treated badly. So so there is a lack of education and ignorance as well. And I think one of the reasons, why that happens is because in my 10 years of studying the Northeast of India, what I have realized is that if you look at popular culture, right? For example, Bollywood movies. You cannot imagine a Naga being the main actor, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say.
Yes.
The representation isn't there,
No, not at all. Like, can you imagine a Naga young guy or a young girl being the main actor or actress in a Hindi film? Why is that?
Never,
Because
never.
they are also Indians. And so that is the reason why there is this lack of understanding, because we, after all, are also determined by our popular culture, right? And
True.
so the moment I ask this question, everybody seems to find it very puzzling. But the reason is because in the US, what has happened in the last 100 years is that there has been a push by Hollywood to actually have diverse representation. So, for example, Sidney Poitier, who was the most famous, is the most famous U.S. Black actor. He was the person who took part in this famous film called "Who Is Coming for Dinner," and in this film they showed the relationship between a Black man and a Caucasian woman, and this happened at the time when this was seen as something that does not happen. So it challenged America's thinking about who is representing them in popular culture, right? I don't think we have had that in India as yet. I remember 5 years ago when I would make this point, people would all realize that, yes, that has not happened. And the Nagas asked me too. They're like, why is it that we are questioned? For example, when we say we are Indian, they're puzzled by it too. And see, if what happens is that once you are questioned by someone else, like let's say hypothetically, someone from North India, the usual feeling is that, I mean, why is it that you are more Indian than me? Are you seeing what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just because you look different. So, and I think those things still continue to remain and needs to be resolved.
I think it's very sad that we get our cultural exposure from popular media rather than like mingling with other people and stuff like that. For me and Mayank, we were very fortunate to be from a military family, so we went to military school, so we could
And different places, postings and all.
grow up with people from all over the world. So we have definitely seen like things like these happening 100%.
Yeah, so you had the fortune to travel across India because of your the military postings, right? And
True.
military schools are very diverse. So yeah, you're very fortunate, but I don't think everybody understands that. And sometimes people don't see that as a priority. So that is another reason why this continues to happen. There is also this weird understanding in the public that somehow people from the Northeast who look different they are inferior, and that is not a very good prism to look at life. So I'm hoping that through our work and our conversations we can start creating this atmosphere where people start thinking about their presumptions, and I think that is where we can start in a hopeful spirit.
Right, because communication awareness is the key to everything, I believe. You need to have a good discourse, you need to spread awareness, but I think it's up to the people from where they choose to get all these information, because it's not like there are only negative things on the internet or everywhere, but somehow people are more biased to the negative opinions. So even
yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying even they know somewhere inside, everyone knows that we should not hate on these people. This is not what they have done. It's something very different, but I don't know what's that tempting thing that still allows them to do this.
I think human nature always is looking for threats. That's how human beings have evolved historically. Right. So our ancestors lived in caves. They have to, we evolve, right, based on how our ancestors evolved. So once this Homo sapiens started walking on two legs and did not have the same, mechanisms like, say, a lion or a tiger has, right, of fighting back, they had to use tools. And so I think the basic premise was to see threats in the environment. And so we continue to do that. And I think I see this tendency that people are more interested or drawn to, things that, for example, is a crime or something that is, as you said, negative. Right. I think there is this human nature and tendency, but actually there are many, as you said, there are also hopeful and positive stories, and that they somehow do not get the same focus. For example, say a shooting gets, or a
True.
fight gets. So yeah, that's human nature. We are
The negative bias.
wired in that way.
Right.
So I'd like to ask, so you said the Northeast states do not have the access to the infrastructure that the rest of the country has. So how much do you think that the geography plays a part in that?
Geography actually plays a very critical role. So, if you look at the connecting line between, say, the Northeast states and the rest of India, it's connected by the Siliguri corridor, which is about 22 kilometers in length. And what is even more important is that that particular corridor has countries like Bhutan, and then China across the border. So there is this also strategic concern. The other reason is that the Northeast is an area that shares about 98% of its border with the rest of South and Southeast Asia, and only 22 kilometers of border with India. So, for example, Nagaland borders Myanmar. Mizoram also borders Myanmar. Arunachal Pradesh borders Tibet. Northeast India, for example, in Silchar, which is Assam, borders Bangladesh. Assam borders Bhutan. So you see, they have all these international borders. And the other reason is that why we have such low level of infrastructure is because it's not very dissimilar to, say, some of the areas I have seen in, say, Orissa or Andhra Pradesh, right? Where internal areas do not get the same level of development. But what is different is that the areas in the Northeast also have porous borders. So the borders with Bangladesh, the borders with Myanmar are not very strictly enforced. So you have the exchange of arms. Myanmar is, by the way, one of the regions which has the highest level of illegal small arms coming from Southeast Asia. It's called the Golden Triangle. So there is the presence of drugs, and then there is the presence of arms.
It's called China's Las Vegas, I think, Myanmar.
I see. I don't know that, but yeah. So it's a very not very governed society, and so and now with the coup happening, and then Myanmar also has a lot of ethnic groups like the Kareng, the Kachings, the Shans that have armed groups, and historically has had armed groups which collaborate with some of the Northeast groups. So that's one reason. The second reason, as you mentioned, geography. India's Lookist policy, which is called the Actist policy today under Prime Minister Modi, has tried to historically uplift the region by investing resources. But when I visited the region, especially areas like More, which is a border town between Myanmar and Manipur of Northeast India, the infrastructure was dismal. The roads were non-existent. They projected More as the gateway to Southeast Asia. And when I visited More, the ATMs would not work. The internet facility was really bad. I hope it's improved, but in at least my open source survey, I don't see it improving to the level that it should if you want to become a gateway. And I think the money that is invested, the usual refrain coming from the local population is that they never see any benefits from it. Because there is a lack of accountability and there is corruption at the local and state level. So those are many reasons as well. And but I think your question, Dheeraj, is that geography is the most important factor because it's not there in your mind, right? Because it's pretty far away. It's a very remote area. It's peripheral. It's not connected to India to the level that other areas are connected. It's borders so many different international states. The borders are porous. The culture is different, especially in the hill areas. And so it really plays a role. And the Indian state has recognized that. I mean, they under Manmohan Singh, they had issued a Northeast Vision 2020, where they had talked about developing Northeast India, especially the geographic disadvantage, and using it as an advantage because India wants to establish greater relation with Southeast Asia, where you have some of the most advanced economies in the world, including Singapore, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, who are doing well. And so the argument was that, okay, since the ocean is not as, ocean is there, but we also need to open a land route and Northeast can act as a conduit. But the problem is that Northeast does not have the same level of infrastructure and economic investment as, say, Southeast Asia beyond Myanmar, right? And so I'm hoping that they have met some of the 2020 goals. But COVID also played a big role in closing down economies.